last, but not the least important speaker is from our host, who is the monitor of the first session, Professor Peter Herman. You have the floor now, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's the most difficult task in a way, because I have had 10 minutes. I'll try to cut them now. Human rights is one of the centers, at least here in this, of our institute as well. And I think it is important really to take democracy as part of the human rights discussion. Now, there is a difficulty, and I try to be a little bit provocative as well. There is no such thing as rights, and there is no such thing as democracy. I think most of the contribution, if not all contributions, showed we are talking about something that is developing, that is in context and can only be understood in the context we are working in. Athens, the ancient Athens, the birthplace, so to say, or many claim this, of democracy, is not comparable with a country as China, for instance, if we simply look at the numbers. So we have to look at contexts, but I think, and this is what I want to do at the end, we have to look at the challenges. Where are we standing now? Democracy and human rights are not what they had been at the origin, but we are facing both, using them as a kind of instrument. We want to achieve something. We want and have to achieve something. And this is now in what is called usually the global village. Fabio mentioned it at the end of his presentation. Climate change, the pandemic, meaning showing how we interact with nature, the metabolism Marx had been talking about. All these things, the change of work in terms of digitization, huge challenges when it comes to human rights and democracy. We, in daily life, in everyday discussions, we simply take them for granted. We know what democracy is, and then we confront it with another concept of democracy, and then we say, oops, there's another option. If we allow this to be done, because what we usually have is this confrontation. It's currently China bashing. Everything what comes from China, what is happening in China is bad, is definitely not democratic. That is what we hear. But what actually happens in China? China is now facing huge challenges in this respect of a changing world, technologically, in terms of nature, in our relationship to nature, in terms of the potentials, the huge potentials we have today. And I think this is something we have to look at as well. There are these problems, but there are these the potentials as well. We have such a wealth, and this is now addressed as well by the Central Committee, by the party here in China. It is about distributing this wealth in China and globally. We have a huge pool of knowledge, but in many cases it is simply used or developed press button. We don't know what we do. We really have to make use of this knowledge, of people knowing what they want, being involved in democratic processes. And this is, of course, something that has to be happen mainly locally. So this is another challenge we face. We act locally. We are all existing in our communities. But at the same time, we are part of a global community, even if it is full of contradictions. And this is, I think, important to take into account, that we are dealing on these two levels. So act locally, democratically there, participation. Mehmet mentioned this, there are problems in the West now that they are getting aware, becoming aware of the problems they have. If you are looking at the news these days, it's just a disaster, and I'm glad to be here because I can be safe here. There you cannot be safe because of so-called demonstrations, anti-vax demonstrations, where people simply oppose for egoistic reasons to be vaccinated. instead of being happy to be protected as well in the global or in a wider context. It's not only protection myself, it is protecting of others as well. So there is this potential and there is the fear, because what we see now, wealth is monopolized in many places, knowledge is monopolized in many cases. What is called democracy in many cases is monopolized, because you can go for elections, that's great, but there is nothing in between, and so on and so forth. The potentials we have, knowledge, global wealth, in terms of participation, the possibilities with digitization, we can use digitization in different ways. So, and this is, I think, what we have to do, looking at democracy, how do we get further? Jhering said, jurist, lawyer in 1872, I think, the struggle, he was talking about the struggle for law. And I think this is the same what we have to face now, the struggle for democracy. We do not have one concept for all of democracy. We have different approaches, and we have to be ready to learn from each other. In this sense, I understand this workshop as a beginning of a debate, or one step of an ongoing debate, and not coming to an end now, even if we are coming to an end now physically for today, but it is something where we have to go on, and I'm happy that we are working now with the support, or the Human Rights Center is setting up as well a global group working on these issues, meeting regularly, and continuing a debate on what is human rights, what is Ubuntu, for instance, what is the problem with vaccination and individual rights of liberty. But we have to look at it in context, and we cannot stay there on a formal level and say, okay, we have votes, we have liberal rights or something like this. These are all parts of growing, of a society that is growing together, hopefully, if we are ready to allow it. So, as I said, I would have had 10 minutes. I stop here. I would have to say something more for 100 minutes at least. Thank you.
谢谢thank you for Professor Peter Herman's address. And